And our first talk is Userland, creating an integrated data flow environment for end users by Isham Mohammed. Thank you.
Hi there. It's good to be back to an academic conference after 2 years. And a very strong burnout after I finished my PhD thesis. So quick introduction. I got 2 years ago I got a PhD at Bugria, the university that's the home of Lua. So I was working at the programming language group over there at Lua. But throughout my PhD, as I was looking for a subject, I kept sneaking into HCI classes. They have a very group HCI, very good HCI group over there. So I kept learning those things and getting interested in what eventually became my thesis topic, that was data flow semantics for end-user programmable applications. So essentially, the bulk of the thesis were case studies on the semantics, like the inner workings of three successful end-user applications that are based on data flow. Three very different ones. LabVIEW, Pure Data, which is an engineering application. Pure Data, which is for electronic music, and Excel, which everyone knows about. So for that work, I did like definitional interpreters of them in Haskell to describe the semantics compare. And as it goes, like summarize your thesis in one sentence. It's like all of those languages are full of words because they were essentially designed by field specialists of those topics and not PL people, right? Languages have words as well. But I ended up dealing in end-user programming and eventually getting to the project that I'm going to show today, based on a niche that goes way back. It starts with that general satisfaction that we all have about like every programming language is terrible, everything is always terrible, right? I think that's what ends up driving us into PL research. At the same time, a bit nostalgia for the Apple II days, like the beginnings of programming, it's like this morning's presentation showing like origins with BASIC, and that sense of ownership and power that you had as a user when you got your first computer, and also deeply ingrained like open source ethos of that style of you don't like it, change it, and it goes all the way to user interfaces, those kinds of things. Like this is when I got into Linux, this is the program that I hated the most. Top, which like was an exercise in terrible interface. Essentially, whenever you got a keystroke wrong, like if you by accident clicked on an arrow, it would emit the full ANSI code and it would beep for a whole second. Like, and they think about what you've done. So it's like, hey, beep, 1 second, wait 1 second. Then the open bracket, beep, another second. Like, and it was every time I accidentally touched the arrow keys when looking at the top. Like it's named after a top because it's just the top. So yeah, so I ended up writing HTOP for like just out of spite, like trying to get rid of that. Like so the key feature that it scrolls, like it does the thing it's supposed to do when you're doing the arrow. So I always had this kind of urge of trying to fix things that I thought were super annoying in the way that I interacted with the computer itself. So going back to that sense of ownership and power, I think we got to a point now, and everyone in this room I'm sure agrees that we have this divide between end users and programmers. And us programmers, well, we still have that power because we know how to program, right? But we sort of took it away from users, right? It's not like one story that always hits my mind so strongly was when we got an Apple II back home in the late 80s, my older sister, who's now a psychologist, she like taught herself BASIC in 1 week to help with my parents, like with an accounting problem that they have in their store. Fast forward 20 years later, she was asking me for help because she was afraid to use a spreadsheet. Right? So she, computers, come on, help me out. And I never forget the time when I was like 7 and she was like 20 and she could handle it, right? So, but at the same time, those of us who have the power and like we can program, we're still using super clunky tools like the aforementioned top or like Bash, right? Really, like being a power user is like a screenful of terminal emulators, like really. And I thought it was just me because I was like this Linux geek. And then when I joined in the PhD and I started attending Splash as a student volunteer, I would go to those sessions that have people like talking about state-of-the-art programming languages, but all the people like with their laptops like I would peek at their screens and they all had like maximized dash sessions, and right. So like this is really what we got, right? And then I was sort of afraid that Dart would come along and revolutionize everything before I even got here, right? But when you look at Ellen's presentation, you know, like she did the whole demo on Dart, the super environment of the future. But the one time she had to switch to the terminal and say, okay, so now we're going to launch it, right? So that's what the one time she was in some other application that was not the environment itself. Like, no, it seems nobody can escape it. Right? And yeah, I asked for both permission to put that slide in. So I guess this is the point where we say, oh, can we do better, right? And do the pretentious thing, right? So, well, so one interesting thing is I had this itch for the longest time, and for years I kept like seeing if like userland.org was available so I can get it when someone else owned it. Until one day I could snatch it, but I have no idea how my like dream environment should look like. Right? At one point I had like a 3-hour meeting with my advisor, and Roberto was like incredibly patient, and made me see that I had no idea what I really wanted. So the direction that my thesis ended up taking was this kind of case study on like real end user programming languages or end user programming environments, right? So and eventually I've come to develop this appreciation about these programmable environments, right, that their users love. Like when you talk to a super power user for Excel or data or like they have that sense of ownership and power, right? Kind of that we have when we use Bash, and that we had back in the day on the Apple II with BASIC, right? That is still around, right? And I had this amazing opportunity that once I was in a bar in a table while I was doing my PhD with a friend that she's a civil engineer, and she essentially lives her life in Excel, and another friend, he owns a studio and is an electronic musician, and he lives his life inside XMSP, right? And they had no idea that they were both using the same thing, essentially, like in Dataflow. And I had to explain to them that, you know, that when he connects an arrow from one to the other, it's the same as when she types like B2 to refer to the other cell, and they both had an aha moment in there, right? And the best thing about that sense of ownership was that I asked them, if you had to do like some kind of calculation, if you had to sum 5 numbers in a computer, how do you do it? And she admitted that she opens Excel for that she doesn't use the calculator. And the guy admitted that he sums numbers inside his music environment. Right? You know, so that is feeling at home in the same way, you know, when we type like Python, you know, just some numbers and things like that. So the whole research was about going, okay, what do those environments have in common? Okay, why do they work, right? So I started looking for answers and knocking the doors at people from the HCI department to help give me clues. And one of the professors, Simone, borrowed me, she lent me this book, and which is an amazing book from 1993, if I'm not wrong. And in it, Boninardi, she talks about these 3 types of programmers, 3 types of people who are involved in the programming activity or in the software activity, right? From users to core developers. And it's really nice because in the presentation about the gaming industry, there were also 3 personas. There was like the system programmers, the scripters, and the content creators. Right, and she called them, I think, domain developers, who are the ones in the middle that we sometimes forget about. Right, and when you start to look at those successful programmable applications, they tend to have this three-tier design. Right, so when we look at spreadsheets that have like macros for the advanced scripter, like and the personas were really interesting because what we call the end user is a sophisticated, it's an advanced user. It's not like a non-technical person, but it's the person who is interested in the domain of what they're really doing, right? So a geologist, he wants to, you know, he cares about geology, and you know, or the civil engineer, she cares about engineering, and it's not really but some of them will become scripters as they become enthusiasts and things like that. So you have to have a little bit for each, and it's very clear where the boundaries in language design are for each level, as we start to look at which are the ones that work. Right? So, and there was this was this paper from Hills in which he lists a number of design dimensions for visual languages, and so there's a bunch of these, and the back when the paper was Tanimoto's original definition with 4 levels of liveness, and so I started looking around for languages and seeing how they fit in there, and it was interesting because in this paper there were a bunch of it was not specific for Dataflow but visual languages in general. Many of them were research languages, and I think the only one that survived from the original paper that exists to this day is LabVIEW. So throughout my work, I extended that definition with like more axes that I was interested in, and I started comparing the applications that I was looking at to see how they fit, and I see like, okay, what is a design that works? And so, not going into details, but like this is like the big table that ended up in my thesis, and it's interesting to see that in Hill's original work, he was looking at whether visual languages had support for higher order functions, for example, and for all of the unlike his work in which he was also looking at research languages, I only looked at industry. I chose to only look at industry-proven languages, like languages that are successful that have people actually using it, like a large user bases. So the first 3 are Pure Data, Excel, and LabVIEW, which I did in-depth research. And then I added some other ones in other fields, like Raptor is also for music, V is also for engineering. Then there's Blender for graphics. And there's things like, for example, none of them have support for higher order functions, which is something that PL people are very interested in, but people from the domain are not interested in at all, right? Because an accountant wants to deal in terms of money, not in terms of friends deal with money, right? They don't want to go, they see no need to go one level higher, right? But on the other hand, some other things like being data-driven or demand-driven, what triggers, like which other triggers the data flow, it varies depending on the application. So it became evident that some of the things like could go either way, and some things for successful models tend to go always the same direction. So then, okay, so I was done with my thesis. I learned a bunch of stuff, and essentially I did nothing with it for 2 years. Like I left academia and then went to work at a startup. That was one of the tiny boxes, one of the 450 tiny boxes in Paul's presentation there. Eventually, after a while, I like the itch, didn't go away. Like I was still annoyed with the way I used my computer, and so enter Userland. I figured that okay, I've learned enough about it, then I can start to try to do something about it the same way I did with my hatred of Toph. So maybe I could do something that could maybe do away with Dash altogether, which I haven't gotten there yet. But here's the start. The start is Userland. I call it here an integrated data flow environment, kind of making a little fun on IDE, but the idea is that I was inspired by the common core of those data flow apps. I looked at those applications, I saw what they have in common, and generally when I did their definitional interpreters of their cores and house flow, I could look at what was mostly the same and what was different, and it's usually, of course, the domain-specific parts different, but the cores, they have commonalities, especially those ones that had successful designs. So the idea was, okay, so what if I just make a shell for those multiple type of applications that people in the second layer, like in the scripting layer, could do the domain-specific parts on top, right? So the actual domain-specific parts would be implemented as modules, right? And then I also I saw a little fun here with mods, because in the game community, they release a game that is extendable, and then people make mods with it. They modify the game, and like entire new genres of gaming were invented, by modders, right? So if you give people so if you give those enthusiasts the ability to mod whatever you're giving them, then they will come up with really new stuff. So I guess it's demo time now. Let's see what we got so far. Okay, I will put myself on a tough spot here, and I'll try to reproduce the demo that I submitted. Thanks, Live Workshop, for accepting videos. If it was, if you guys only accepted a paper, maybe I probably would not have submitted, because my trauma of LaTeX related still haven't receded that much. But yeah, I'm even gonna go full screen because to pretend that we're already in that world. But I think this is too small, right? I'll try to make it bigger, and of course, I'll have to edit the source code for that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Is that readable from back?
Yep.
All right, so let's give that a try. Okay, so you start with a blank screen and a prompt, asking you what do you want, kind of like when you turn on an Apple II for the first time. Want to get that feel of the blank slate, right? The world is yours. So we start with a cell. So if you do this, it can be your calculator. So in case you fall in love with it, and it's essentially the spreadsheet is at first, right? It does what you expect. So we get those things here. And let's see, and if you change response, everything so far seems normal. But this is I'm starting with the default mode here, which is spreadsheet, because it's the most widely programming language in the world, after all. But if I press the key combination here, then I can switch modes. Then I go to the mode that I really want to use, which is shell. Right? So it starts as a normal shell, right? In which you can do normal things, such as right now I'm actually forking to bash here, so it's really going to do the things as yeah, as always. That's one of the reasons we get rid of it. So it's over there. It's running, but at the same time, I can get back here. I can, as it runs, I can still manipulate. Like you see that it's sleeping, but it didn't hold the system, right? So I can do things. This. See that this is actually an internal implemented module because it's doing syntax highlighting on cat. It's not really the cat from the system because the idea is to over time replace everything. But then you can do things like this. Like here I open the pipeline. So UI, go into tag, just go to back, takes it backwards, counts lines. Okay, well, I did not prepare for this font size, so it's going to be a lot of back and forth, but then I can do things like local here, it's updated, kind of like the spreadsheet. Both data-driven and event-driven have to support both directions because of these different kinds of interaction. But yeah, but the idea is supposed to work just like a shell in linear in that mode. So I'm down for now I'm going for the keyboard style of interaction. So Control L, and then back to the top. But of course, since it's a graphical environment, it's expected that we can go beyond character displays. But it can also integrate with kind of show. This is image magic. Take the tag at the output, show. No, it's not invert, it's negate. Yeah, so now I got the inverted image over there. And I can make the models. I can make the modules talk to each other. So if I go here and I go back to spreadsheet, do something like rotate. Now I'm rotated based on that. So I change the. Now it's rotated further. So the whole thing works as expect. This is actually so far what I had presented in the video that I submitted. Since then, been doing some more fun stuff and implemented a new module that does things like triangle. Start like this. Essentially, I started like a separate module, which is like a small synthesizer. Yeah.
So far, I'm showing examples that only just output. What if some of the shell scripts that you're running there have non-local side effects, like they write files, they delete files.
grep pipe RMs.
Yeah, so what, it's interesting, for that, yes, that was brought up, and for now, I'm exploiting a thing that, the Unix thing in which commands that just perform side effects, they usually produce no output. So if I fire a shell node that runs but produces no output, it goes gray. Let's try to do that shell. No touch. LS here, I have blah over there, I touch blah. You see that LS updated as well, because that's not the system's LS, so the LS there is reactive, so no more typing command LS, typing command LS, typing command LS, back and forth. So if oh, you see touch has already done it, like touch went gray, so I did, but now do RM blah, this, it's hard to see here, but this cell went gray. So if I had a different cell that was referencing this one, it would not fire it. You have to go there and click it and bring it back to life.
What about RMA2 and then change A2?
What?
You might,
What
what I'm getting at is, to me, this feels dangerous because anytime you change a cell that A2 depends on, you're going to be deleting files.
Yes, but then it's essentially like writing a shell script. You're telling it to do it.
You're writing a shell script, but it's a shell script in a reactive construct environment.
Didn't he say that like if it returns no?
Yeah, it will only fire once. The RM, it's only fire when I press enter. Then it's gonna go gray.
I see. That's great.
Based on this heuristic, like.
Yes, right now it's this heuristic. Over time, we're gonna know like which ones are safe. Like which operations are safe and which ones are not. We can replace all. Right. So yeah. So yeah, but there are fun things that we can do. For example, I can do something. Let me try something fun here and do the while. I'm gonna add a stop condition otherwise. Two equals one. Two, I could sleep. I need another variable. Sleep. A3. Equal 10. Sleep. A3 again. Then done. Things gonna go okay. It's printing. So it's gonna stop scrolling at one point and then scroll the context for it. Okay. Okay, so if I go here in the triangle for 21, should get higher, but it's going upwards. Then I can go here and say I want 21 times 2 to make me a nice line. Triangle of A6. Okay, now we mix the synthesizer, the spreadsheet, and the shell. Right? They're all working together. Yeah, they like cards. I came up with this like yesterday, like when I was preparing the presentation. So I had fun with it. Okay, how does help us now? Oh,
So we should be going into questions now.
Yes, yeah, we are okay. Quick, current status. This is the prototype written in Lua because it's the thing I'm fascinated that's coding at. I'm using a game engine for this because I figured out that gaming people know what's up. So the application modules so far they are written in Lua. These are the ones. I'm still fleshing out the details of the semantics. Some of the modules still have some words in there to make everything work. Future directions, of course, we can work with core, stable API for application modules, so that other people can start inventing their own modules for applications which I haven't thought of. And right now it's very keyboard driven because I'm the first user, and of course there's some amount of support, but there should be even more. Right? So, yeah. Now, questions?
So in the list of sort of design choices that you gave, 92 data, or whatever it was, one of the choices was whether you have sub-program abstract.
Yes.
So I was wondering whether you have that or whether you're planning to have that.
Yeah, okay, that's, I had a slide ready for this, so not yet, but it's intended, because evidently I started copying Excel, then I started copying pure data, and I put in the shell in the middle because it's the one I really wanted. And the next module, I'm gonna start copying LabVIEW. LabVIEW does have a nice subprogram abstraction in which you can essentially group a bunch of boxes and define which ones are the inputs and outputs. And yes, yes, so essentially what's guiding my design now is looking at this table and seeing like what really works. And yes, like they tend to have, like, if you look at this, all of them have yes, 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 yes. The only one says no.
Well, I think even Excel now there's something there.
Yeah, yes, but there's a paper from, I think, early 2000s in which like Simon Peyton-Jones and Margaret Burnett joined forces, like PL and HCI tried to come together to fix this, and they came up with a nice prototype that ended up not being picked up by the Microsoft team.
Picks up again or like
As a visual mode, like in the,
you have a worksheet that's parameterized essentially, and you use that as a function.
yeah, all right, yeah, so that was the original design for the paper. Yeah, so clearly this one is something that has to like, right?
Are you using it already as a user?
No, not really, because mostly because the bar for keyboard interaction is really high. Like we've become so used and so fast. Like every things like completion has to work and everything. Like to beat Bash, actually it's C shell, but same idea. Right? In order to beat that, you have to have like all sorts of little shortcuts that we got used to. So I'm not there yet, but prefer.
Programs like LS, they actually different. Did you build them in your platform, or did they build? I mean, is there some API?
Yeah, they are. The ones. One interesting thing there is that they're living inside the shell nodes, right? So they are like sub-modules in the shell module. They are not part of the core application. Essentially, they live in user. They are in that file. That file says shell. They have shell spreadsheet in the synth. So right now they're part of that. So that should be also split into several.
So if there would be another program that I built only for this, you would need to transport it to be able to run like outside of. If that would make sense again.
No, yeah, but I did. You mean, for example, to have to get the output of my custom cat into the spreadsheet itself? You mean to interact with the other types of cells?
I was thinking I accidentally deleted my LS, so I would like to use your LS.
Ah, I see. Yeah, no, now they're designed to live in here. For now, because. You have a question?
Yeah, regarding whether you're using it yourself. So have you used it for smaller things yet?
For smaller things?
The calculator thing, for example.
What?
Would you open it up as a calculator?
Not yet because I'm still living in the shell, but I started noticing some fun stuff. Like yesterday, I was preparing for the demo and I was getting the orders of the arguments of sec wrong. But then I realized I could just press to the right and call man, open up the man page, right there. And it was nice getting to the side and getting back. And then also when I realized that you guys folks have seen me do it here. I was typing in a long command, and then I realized I needed variables. I would go down, create a new cell, and then go back, right? Which is something that's clunky to do in the shell. You're typing in a long while through, oh no, I need another variable. And it goes, we have to go to the beginning and do like
Comment.
Yeah, I know. Like, we all been there, right? But
Because my experience from also living in my own environment is, the moment you start doing it, you get used to it and you just solve the problems, and it takes you a week, and then the standard usability issues are out of the way, and then you really can use it very quickly.
yeah, I'm sort of afraid of getting used to the quirks instead.
Yeah.
Right? So
It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
So one last thing,
are you planning to support saving the whole thing as a spreadsheet or a session or something?
I was thinking about that like in the morning when they were talking about this. So yeah, it's a tempting idea. When you mentioned like save states, I thought like I should have save states. Oh, yes.
So I think you should call this shell cell.
Yeah, that shows.
Shell cell or shell sheets, shell sheets.
But that's not just one of the
Shell-
applications.
Shell sheets by the seashore.
That's only one of the applications. Like the synthesizer, people will not care about the shell mode at all. Yeah.
All right, well, let's thank Hisham. The shell sheets. Okay, so our next talk is by, oops, I forgot you, Taku Kata. Puppy, an educational simplification of Python with a live program, and I assume that we'll be seeing pictures of cute puppies.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Takutada. This is a joint work with my colleague Yuka Makoto and Professor Grant. I'd like to talk about our new language and live programming for coding. Background of today's presentation is introductory programming. Today, high school students start programming with Scratch and so on. In this presentation, these languages, we call it education languages. And other languages, we call it practical languages, such as Python, C, Java, and so on. Educational languages have different features from practical languages. These languages are easy to get started without environment setup, and you can learn visually on GUI. And most programming tasks are complete without a keyboard. But do you want to write software in Scratch or other educational languages? So every software program is written in practical languages. So students would think that they want to learn Python or something in other languages. If students try practical languages, after learning educational languages, they can be troubled by the gaps. So we developed a new language to bridge the gap. We call this programming languages Puppy. Puppy is simple Python running on WebID. Puppy's key feature are below. We integrate physics engine into the WebIDE. And Puppy has three experimental coding assistants: live programming, natural languages processing coding, and static type checking. Finally, Coursera supports running Puppy and Python. In this presentation, I focus on, of course, live programming. But before that, let me talk about the integrated physics engine related to live programming. Puppy Playground is a web IDE integrated with the physics engine. You write the program left-hand side. If you run the program, you see the visualized result of the program. And visualized objects created by the physics engine. And the physics engine realizes complex movements with a small amount of code. So let's see detail on the code. You define a word with these parameters, and you put rectangle at this at position 800 and 900. Each study parameter means the fixed initial quotient. And ignoring some physical power, for example, gravity or collision. And by this for loop like Python, you put 7 rectangles by shifting position. Finally, you drop a circle to push the first block. How it works. So let's see behind Puppy program. A little program is divided into some code fragments. Each code executes at intervals, and the physics engine repeats calculation behind the program execution, like this. Why insert intervals? In Puppy playground, little program executes step by step. We think intervals can help to understand the procedure of program. This movie shows the procedure of feedback program by code highlighting. But in other words, a Puppy program executes slowly. So modification tasks consume a lot of time. The movie is during writing the domino program. This ball is too small to push the first domino. If you modify the ball windows, the program restarts from the beginning. And then, when you modify a bit of position, the program restarts from the beginning again. So even a small code, even a small modification requires restarting the whole program from the beginning. So how live programming improves this program? To improve the program, we have two approaches of live programming. First, I will talk about live focus. I show you how is live focus in this demonstration movie. When you increase the institution parameter, the ball bouncing is changed fluidly. Of course, decreasing is also available. And changing color and pasting image are also available without stopping the program. But changing initial position is not available. In this case, our program restarts from the beginning. In addition, other modifications are also required to restarting from the beginning. In live focus, you can see fluid program changes, but live focus is part of design. So the various feedbacks in modification cases may be mysterious for students. Next, I'd like to talk about time reply. This approach is more improved from line focus. Before talking about this, let me talk about the new implementation of Happy Playground update from our submission. We developed Happy Playground as a serverless application. So all code is in client side. User interface is written in React. This editor uses Monaco editor. It is a code editor that powers the Visual Studio Code. When you write a program in the editor, the program is sent to transpiler. The transpiler translates Happy to JavaScript, and the translated JavaScript translates JavaScript program called Matter.js API. Matter.js is a 2D physics engine library. So by this library, the results of the program is visualized and simulated. I'd like to show you time reply demonstration on the new Happy Playground. You write this code. Sorry. Okay. If you like this, the circle puts at position 100 and 100. So this board is not zero, so I like we don't need to set 200. And I like circle more. I like more two circle by shifting position 400. Okay. There are three circles. If you modify the second circle, a program starts from the second circle appear. And if you write the third circle, program starts from the third circle appear. So, as I say, a written program divided into some code fragments, and each code is executes at intervals. In this demonstration, we set intervals 500 milliseconds. Here, let's see the time in physics engine. Get time method is show you time in physics engine. So time is 1,500 milliseconds. Means program progress to line at the 13. So in time reply, hidden program progress to a modified point and also progress to time in physics edge. Let's go back to my presentation. I'd like to explain inside of type reply. As I said, results like a program restarts from the beginning. On the other hand, in time reply, the intervals are removed until reach a modified point. So you can start a program from a modified point. And time reply is synchronized with the editor. When you finish modifying timer, it sets to 300 milliseconds. After 300, a return program progresses to a modified point and stop by time speed flag, like this. At the same time that time read starts, another timer is set to 1,500 milliseconds. After 1,500 milliseconds, a return program starts from the modified point, like this. If you modify the program in a time of this editor timer, the timer and the physics engine and runtime restart and synchronize from the beginning. So far, I've explained time reply. Let's see how time reply improves modification tasks. I'd like to start the putting circle to push the first point. Anyway, I like the circle at 100 and 100, but it is too small to push the first point. So so like this, you can try a lot of patterns in modification techniques. And initial function also available. So let's go back to my presentation. Finally, conclusion. Puppy is a simple Python running on Puppy program. A Puppy program runs step by step in Puppy program. So modification tasks consume a lot of time. We think live programming can improve modification tasks. To improve this, we have two approaches of live programming. First, live focus. But in live focus, in live focus, we can see fluid program changes, but it is ad hoc different. Time reply is improved approach from live focus. you can start program from a modified point, and you can check what will be changed immediately. You will try Puppy here. Thank you.
There's time for questions.
So you're interfacing with an external physics library. And obviously a lot of those parameters in there, like gravity and the mass of these things, are already set. Are you going to integrate it so that you can change those from within your environment to maybe, change the friction or the gravity so that you can play with that more?
If your question changing gravity and some information.
Yeah, I'm just curious how your system will interact with like this external library that you've integrated. So you're like integrating them closely together, but there's still like a boundary between the two. And what I'm curious about is if you've tried to move that boundary so that it encompasses more of the physics engine that you're using.
More only the Matter.js, we implement, we extend to from Matter.js. That's big. So gravity or boundary is in the future is feature in the Matter.js.
Can you influence it from Puppy? Is there a function or something that you can use in Puppy that changes the gravity? You have all of Matter.js available or not?
Yes, available.
You have, yeah.
But now, this implementation is not supporting changing gravity, but I validated its previous. So it is available, but this pattern is not supported. It's this version. Of course, this version supports changing gravity and so on. It's plan to. I have a plan to something from it changes. Yeah.
Have you thought of using Puppy not only in programming classes, but also, let's say, physics classes?
It is interesting, but I didn't think so. But this is very interesting.
Definitely 2D physics class.
But our concept is learning to programming for want to learning practical language.
Thank you. I really like your ideas. In the beginning, you had these stairs And you said you don't want the very basic programmers, but you want somehow start more in the middle of the stairs. Can you explain how you see that not at the very left, but I'm unsure how. I mean, I think this is a very good tool to start at the very left. So, but you seem to have located it rather in the middle, right? So there's the amateurs and there's the experts, and somehow your motivation was to fill the gap.
Yes.
So maybe I'm unsure what the gap was. I'm just wondering how this seems to be a better tool than some others, right? That have been only at the very left. Maybe I didn't misunderstood the gap. Can you explain that again for me? Exactly.
You know, so
So where is Puppy on there? In the middle?
First step, second step.
So it looks like it's not in the middle, but it's a little bit closer to the left side. That's the first step. I was going to say the opposite because it teaches transferable skills from the practical language. It teaches Python syntax and going from that to Python to other sorts of Python.
So you
Like it's easier to transfer that to Python than like
learn
Scratch.
all those small things regarding where to put your columns and
At the very least you learn the syntax. It's already
set.
all those small things that add up to the whole thing that you and then eventually
so
second step then. I changed my mind.
I see.
Yeah, good job of being in the middle.
So your time leap by programming, how well does that work? Are there still problems that need to be fixed?
in the future.
Yeah.
I think I plan to develop the more powerful editor, something like so. For example, if you tracking with from the value right or left, the value changed at in real time. Increase or decrease. And more.
So I think you're saying you want sliders?
Yeah, like slide.
Any other questions? All right, let's thank the speaker. Okay, our last speaker of this session is Tomas Petricek. His presentation is called Histogram. You have to know the past to understand the present. Set up here. Then we'll have, after this, we'll have a break, short break, and then our final session will be our closing keynote from James Noble, who's not here, but will be.
I'll keep connecting some cables for the next few minutes. I think I'm always there.
This window.
fonts. That's a dark mode. The dark mode. Dark mode. All right. So thanks for coming. I'm going to be talking about histogram. If there are any statisticians in the room, that's not what I'm going to be talking about. It stands for history and programming. But the acronym was taken already. But so the idea for this is really sort of my experience with programming, and I've done some work. My PhD was in programming languages, and then I ended up being in a room with a lot of data scientists. I'm trying to do some data science myself, and by that I mean really sort of simple data exploration. So it's motivated by the kind of data exploration that, say, a journalist might do. And I'm going to show you an example, not using histogram. This is using F#, which is my favorite programming language after histogram. And this is just sort of to show you what it feels like to work with some data. So what I'm doing here is I've got some data manipulation library where I can say, read this CSV file, and I have a REPL where whenever I type something, I can run it here and see the output. It's sort of lots of languages have REPLs of some kind, or if you're using Jupyter notebooks, you have somewhat different model, but you still have this sort of I type some code, I run it. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to define a name for this, and then this is a data frame which records all aviation accidents in the EU. You can get it from Eurostat. It's the format is terrible, but I cleaned it up a little bit. And you have things like what kind of was it injury or was it death? What were the countries where the aircraft was registered and where the event happened, and then how many people died. So you have sort of this massive file with combinations of countries, and there's a row for, say, dead people in accidents in aircrafts registered in France that occurred in Greece. That's a row. So there's plenty of zeros there. And if I just want to get some sort of aggregate, so there's another thing that I didn't say, which is there's these EU28 rows, which is actually an aggregate over all the countries. So some of the rows in the file are also aggregates. So if I want to do some sort of summing, I typically have to do things like filter it. So I'm going to say filter this, and I'm only going to be interested in rows where people died. Sorry. So I type some code, run it. Okay, I've got those. And I also only want rows where they're not one of these weird aggregate rows, where CRegis is not EU28, and also Geo is not EU28. So I've been typing some code. Again, I run it, get my aggregates, and then I can do some statistics on it. And this library actually has a sort of convenient sum operation which runs on the whole data frame, and it just sums every column that's summable. For things that aren't summable, like the things at the top, you just get missing. So now what I've got is the number of people who died in air crashes in EU for different years. And what I was trying to do here, what was my original motivation, was to actually compare it with rail traffic accidents. So I did the same thing for rail. The code is pretty much the same, and with a few more lines, I can actually show you a chart. So it turns out that flying is a lot safer, but Rail has been getting better. So this is the kind of data analysis that a journalist might do when they want to write an article about transport. And there really isn't it isn't very hard programming, but there's lots of interesting sort of programming aspects to it. And what I think is really interesting about this kind of work is that a lot of research that people do in all the other rooms that are in this very hotel are sort of focused on programs. So we have sort of theories of programming languages, we have compilers that take programs, and programs are really sort of missing a lot about what I was doing when I was showing you the data analysis. So programs really just capture the final result after you went through some creative process, and if I was to do a bit more work on that code, I'd clean it up, make it nice, and that would be my result. Programs are also only recipes. They sort of don't have any state attached to them. The fact that I just load some file here, that's just the file name that has to exist. And they also have this very sort of syntactic structure. But I think there's a lot more if you look at programming, because then you're really looking at this whole sort of creative process. You make various adaptations when you're writing the code that you could learn from. You run bits of code as well, and you interact with your environment, with your different sort of aspects of the language. And the other thing I want to sort of say a few things about, that's the thing I submitted is this interactive essay, which you'll see shortly. And I think there's a bit of medium is the message in programming research. And things like my PhD thesis had lots of these equations, which is great when you're talking about programs. It also fits beautifully on a paper, so you can write amazing papers with lots of equations. But I'm not really sure if that's a good way of talking about user interaction. So the other sort of message of my talk, and I'll show you a little bit, and I'll give you a link where you can have a look, is how can we actually sort of convey ideas about how you interact with your programming environment in a way where others can learn from it, and we can sort of build a collaborative community around it. So that's the two ideas I want to talk about. And the actual system that I'm going to show you is based on a couple of simple principles. So one principle is, rather than representing programs as source code, we're going to represent them as lists of interactions. So whenever I have my sort of environment, I do something with it, that's an interaction. And the end result, the program I get at the end, is just this list, and I can replay that item. I'm going to do it in a way where, as much as possible, I want to be able to program just by choosing from lists, because if I'm sort of faced with a blank text editor, I don't know where to start. Rather than sort of giving users, here's a blank screen, type something, I want to give them a list and ask, choose something. And I think there's sort of interesting consequences that this is actually moving away from complete syntax. And I'm going to be using this data science example with my air traffic accidents as a motivation. So, I can see how this works. So what I've got here is a programming environment which uses a simple sort of structured editor where I can click on things, and one of the things I can do, I defined two values here already, just to make sure I get this right. And I have some built-in libraries just for charts and for loading data. So there's nothing else in there. And I can say load, and this is a method. And one interesting thing is when you have an operation, I actually give you a hint of, well, the only way to call an operation is to choose from a list. But I know I've defined a compatible or a value of a type that's compatible with what my method expects. So I can load this file, and I can click here, and I can actually evaluate this call as well, and see my data table with air traffic accidents. So that's the same thing I was working with before. And if I want to do the same kind of aggregation, then another thing I want to do is whenever you're creating some sort of abstraction like functions, rather than starting by sort of saying function, something takes an argument, and then write the code, I'm only going to be, or the way I want to create functions is from concrete bits of code that I actually sort of run using concrete samples. So you'll see what this means in a second. And what I've done so far is I wrote code to access one sample row from my file. This is carefully picked one. That's the row that represents the Germanwings accident over, I think, France or over Alps somewhere from 2015. And what I'm going to do now is sort of write this concrete filter for what kind of rows I care about using this sample row. So what do I want? I want victim to be killed. That will be my environment, and I'll say victim equals kill. And another thing I want is C-regis, and I'll just do, I think C-regis is enough, not to be EU28. I'm going to say this, dot C-regis, not equals, and value, EU28. And you can see now I'm getting a lot more suggestions here. Because this just takes a string, and these are all the strings that are available in my environment. So you can pick one of those strings. And I think this should be good enough. So then I can say this is a Boolean, and my other condition is kill. And now I've composed this sort of big expression that evaluates the condition for my rows. And what I can do now is, again, take my data table. So first I'm actually going to go here and say, one interesting, so what I want to do now is to sort of reuse this, but run this as a condition, as a filter on all the different rows that I have in my data set. So I can say, turn this into a function, and when you do this, you get basically a list that says, pick something, pick a sub-expression of this thing, and turn it into the argument of the function. So in my case, I want to have the row as an argument. So I'm going to pick this thing, which is the code in my construction that accesses the row. And this creates a function value. I'm still trying to figure out how to hide those or how to make them sort of more accessible. But for now, this is a function that takes a row, checks that the C-regis is not EU28, and checks that victim equals kill. One interesting thing I can do because of my representation, when I did this, it was just adding another instruction. So I just added an instruction that says, turn this into a function. And one interesting thing I can do is you can actually still see the value. So you know the function was created from a sample value, and that means I can remember what the value was and give you some sort of examples. So now I know that a C-regis is something that could, for example, be TE, which stands for Germany in this case. Victim is something that could be, for example, kill. So even inside functions, you still have these central values, which I think are really useful for debugging. And now I can take this data source again and say, filter using this function as an argument, evaluate this. This is where my JavaScript gets a bit slow, and I have some operation as well. So now I ended up with the same total number of deaths per year, and I think the last operation I can do is to create a bar chart using the filtered data as my input, and there's a chart. So this is how you sort of do this whole simple data analysis using histogram programming environment. So what's interesting about this? I think there are, so this idea of representing programs as interactions, a lot of the interactions I had are fairly sort of normal, boring programming interactions. So accessing a member of an object using dot, or invoking a method with some arguments, or defining a value. That's things you do when you do normal programming. There's things that are sort of further away from the typical programming language representations, like my function. You don't do that by writing a function. You do it by something that's like an extract function refactoring. My evaluation is also just another interaction in my program. And I think there's potentially a lot more that could be added here. You can see there's still empty space on this slide. So I'm really interested in sort of what kind of other interactions we should actually talk about. And I think in data science, it could be, for example, things like copying data manually or doing some sort of manual tweaking and so on. What does this let you do? So there's some interesting things that happen in this environment. One is that I'm actually now type checking this list of interactions, which can include evaluation. So there's cases where if you run something, you actually change type of some values, some variables in your environment. There's ways to bind interactions to user interface. So you can say, if I click on something here, this should trigger certain interruptions. And I can also render the same program in different ways. And I wasn't even expecting to have time to show you this, but I'll give you a link at the end. And there's another way of rendering the program where it makes it look more like a spreadsheet. I think you have, I scroll down here. There it is. So this is viewing the same program. It's actually the same list of interactions, but it's rendered more like a spreadsheet. It's not still not quite sort of Excel, because what you see here is the code, not the values. But I think that's another area where you can do a lot more. And another thing I wanted to show is, right, if I load my data, I just get to this point. The idea I mentioned is you can bind the interactions to user interface. So when I have a preview like this, all these, it's not just a preview, but I can, for example, say, if I only want victim equals kill, I can select it here, and this triggers a couple of interactions that construct the sort of program to transform the table. So here, this feels like a sort of normal table view where you can interact with it, you can sort it,
Get sorted by the number of, then you change the number of gaps.
I can't, sorry, that would be a side effect. I do actually want to make this editable and let you sort of change the values there and write the script to report what you've done. Yeah, saving the people, that sort of stuff. That's perfectly the goal of my grant application. But you can interact with your data, and that's just triggering some interactions, which is, I think, a lot easier than sort of doing the similar thing with AST representation of the program. The side point I want to mention is the way this is actually done is that it's this interactive essay where you can read some text. Then there's some animations, and then when you get to the actual program part, this is a sort of widget where as you scroll, it replays a demo. So this was just replaying part of the demo that I did, but you can also deviate from the demo and start doing your own things. And this was sort of motivated by my feeling that we don't really know very well how to talk about design aspects of these interactive systems. And I think in particular, one of the things that always annoys me is when you sort of see this amazing work at a workshop like this, where often people will view it as an early work on some sort of early work or work in progress presentations, because it doesn't have truths or performance evaluations. And some people will then go and actually do the truths and performance evaluations. But I feel like that's sort of shifting the focus from what we actually came here to do to something that the people in the other rooms want to do. We've written a paper with Jonathan and a couple of others called Evaluating Programming Systems Design. If you Google this, then you'll find it. It was presented at PPIG, which talks about this problem and has some mostly talks about the problem, doesn't really have. And my approach here is somewhat inspired by Ian Hacking, who has this nice book called Representing and Intervening on sort of philosophy of science. And this is really concerned with sort of questions about whether things like electrons are real or whether they're models. And he has this idea that, well, if you can stray them, then they exist. So the idea is if you have some sort of experiment that you can conduct without really worrying too much about the theory, then that's a transferable theory-independent scientific result. And I think for this community, there's this sort of interesting question of how do we make presentations or results theory independent? Or how do we make sort of things that don't depend on a particular system in which they're implemented? And I think oftentimes you sort of go to a small talk and you see all these amazing things without any idea how to apply it elsewhere. So one of my motivations was also to sort of come up with a way of presenting this where you can see the effects that you get by making particular design choices, and hopefully it's done in a way where some of the ideas will transfer to other contexts. So that's all I wanted to say. And you can find it on thomasp.net/histogram. You probably can't Google it because of the bloody statisticians. And you should really see this more as a sort of a point in programming systems design space. So I'm not trying to have any users for this. I'm just trying to sort of explore this particular choice of design aspects and see where this leads. And I think there were some sort of ideas that this actually shared with a couple of the earlier talks. So the question is, how do we document this? And my motivation was really to sort of study programming, not programs. That's the buzzword. I wanted to follow this idea of representing programs as this list of instructions, and I think there's a lot more that could be done along those lines because there's plenty of other ways of interacting with programs, and all the programming I did was just by choosing. So hopefully that's something that allows new interesting experience that others can copy as well. All right, questions?
Thank you, very entertaining talk. Is it possible to create programs with type errors? And double-barreled question, right? Can you abstract away from strings to get more kind of like categorical data types?
Yeah, so the first question is there a way to create programs with type errors? So I think there's, see, that's where I have to make it a Matthew research work by adding all the formalism. I think that the way so what not well typed would mean in this context is that you're trying to do an interruption that's not allowed given the state of the program. And I think my editor doesn't let you do that. But
Like when
I'm
you're
not
trying to
exactly
sum textual columns, say instead, what to say, undefined.
Yeah, so there's sort of, you can try to do that. You can try to sum textual columns and it will probably just give you undefined. But I think that's more sort of, this is something that a lot of type systems can't check against. So I'm not really, I think I haven't done a huge amount of work on guaranteeing safety, and I think partly it's just because I don't feel like I need it too much, because you always have values. So I'm not using types for safety as much. I'm using them for the dot, for the completions, but yeah. The categorical question, so I guess that relates to sort of, I don't really even have a proper type system in a traditional sense. I do have types, but I think there's possibly a lot more interactions you could enable if you had that more semantic knowledge of your data. So I think that's really sort of good motivation for the future.
But presumably, if you add discriminated unions, that'll just be another type like a string that would pop up in those menus.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I think at one point you were doing a completion that suggested every string that was available.
Yeah.
Right? And giving the specifics of the domain, like you're checking if a column is equal to, one option would be to just like get every value from that column, like suggest only like insert or kill, like and not the other strings.
Yeah. No, I think that
they're essentially an enum, right?
If you sort of annotated strings with more semantic information just about maybe what column they come from, then you could actually do a lot more useful stuff.
So for now, you only have choices, right?
Yeah.
In terms of interactions. If you move on to things like editing things in the original data, or at least the table that shows the original data, how do you make sure they're not ambiguous? Because like, if you have an interaction like that, it might mean that, I want to change something in place, or it's an example of a transformation that I'm doing. Or...
Yeah. So I don't really have a good answer to this, but the idea that you should sort of be able to edit the table and maybe change a few values, and then the system can either say, do you just want to change these values, or do you mean a general sort of filter or general transformation that it should extend? Well, I think then you get a choice between these two.
Sure.
So, but the work on sort of programming by example, where things like this have been done, I think that's a good motivation for sort of
improving the user experience of this.
You mentioned the idea of representing a program as a list of interaction. And I guess you have this list in your render, this AST file, show the model of the current program. But how is it different in actually storing the AST in the model?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And I started with this idea that you should represent programs as lists of interactions because I thought that lets you do lots of cool things. And I think most of the things I actually ended up doing, you could also just do without them. I still think there's potentially sort of, there's some areas where it's nice, like this sort of triggering of interactions by clicking on something in the preview is a lot easier to describe than doing a AST transformation when you click on something. So I think that's one area where I've actually used it. I think so I think you have in Lambu, you have an example of when you call a function and then you modify the function, your previous call still knows it was calling the old version, and so it knows that you have to add the value for the argument. I think that's something I can actually do quite nicely with this list of instructions, because I know that my edit operation to the function came after the operation that added the call, and then just from the list you could sort of calculate that this call has been done before this parameter was added. So I think that's one actually concrete case where that representation might be useful. But I think there's potentially more, and I just haven't figured it out yet. I think there's a question with that.
It's more of a comment probably. 2 years ago at PX, there was an idea paper, I would say, called that. But the idea was that maybe we can see the interaction between programmer and development environment, in the largest sense, as a game theoretical problem. And there was no implementation or anything in there. It was only a what if. And I think that's actually really extended to that notion, because it was this, the program is doing something as a move in a game, and then the IDE tries to infer what the program is doing, and then
fight them.
Fight or co-op, maybe it's a cooperative.
Yeah.
It's definitely zero sum.
That's not my experience. Yeah, it's definitely not cooperative. No, I think that's a yeah, thanks for the reference, because that is.
It feels like it's the same, like, this is much more concrete and useful. The other thing was,
yeah, and I think a lot of the sort of, my thinking internally was, like, how can the environment best sort of offer the programmer the choices that they are most likely to need, given their previous actions. So that might be a nice way of talking about it.
It reminds me of kind of interactive group systems, like active and so on. You have a whole, you're trying to fit in an expression that has that type, that's your goal essentially, and the editor's the opponent trying to kind of, choices, and it's giving you choices, you're responding by taking a choice.
So we should probably, we can continue this conversation, but officially the session's over and you can leave if you want to. And we'll be reconvening